Chapter 3. The clock that sleeps from the moonlit voyage of Liora, the somnia, moved the way a lullaby does, forward without hurry, soft on the edges, sure in the middle. Liora sat near the prow with her sea rose lantern resting against her chest, its glow tucked small and warm as a cupped firefly. Beside it, the compass of quiet leaned within its little window, the needle not so much pointing as wanting, a gentle tug in a particular direction that matched the rhythm of her breath. The river widened, the banks fell away, and night became a room with high ceilings. Stars loosened like buttons. Ahead, a low island rose out of the dark, stitched with cobblestones and edged in lamps whose light looked like butter melting on cool stone. There was a tower in the middle, stout, round, and kind to the eye, without numbers or hands, without any face at all. It had shutters, though, and the shutters were closed as if the tower were keeping its eyelids lower to listen. Farron guided the pole a little to starboard and let the somnia glide into place along a mooring carved like a pillow. Nap tide, he said, voice pitched low so it wouldn't wake anything that wished to sleep. A town where clocks take their nightly rest, and people remember the old measures of time. Liora smiled at the word. Asterisk naptide asterisk, the way it folded two kinds of easing into one. The lantern at her chest pulsed once, as if agreeing with the name. She stepped onto the cobbles and felt them answer back with a quiet thrum, the way a cat vibrates under a hand. Shops leaned toward one another with their signs tucked in. Crumbs of time, we save the good ones. Laces for loose hours, tea while you wait for nothing in particular. Windows glowed the color of warm bread. From somewhere, a kettle sighed. Liora listened for the world's familiar metronome. Ticks, tocks, chimes, and found only a steady hush that seemed to hold everything rather than count it. Clocks are sleeping, Farron said, as if answering a question that had just formed at her chest. They do their best work after they remember to rest. At the base of the shuttered tower sat a man in a wooden chair with a ledger on his lap. He had the look of someone who woke fully and kindly. No flinching, no scramble. Visitors, he said, closing the ledger with a satisfied pat. Good. We like new ears. He stood and bowed a little. Wren, tower warden, you've arrived during the second quiet. What's the second quiet? Liora asked. The town has 3, Wren said, counting on his fingers as if telling a child a favorite story. The first, when work puts its tools away. The second, when clocks close their eyes. The third, just before dawn, when even the wind remembers a dream. He looked at Liora's lantern with the pleased curiosity of a craftsperson noticing another's careful tool. Rose, he murmured, you'll hear the soft parts of tonight. Farron touched the brim of his star-stitched hat. We'll keep to your pace. Wren led them along a lane that curved rather than ended. Benches faced one another, so conversations didn't have to shout. Cats owned the thresholds, offering their approval sparingly. Every doorway wore a small cloth bag tied with a ribbon. Inside, Wren explained, people kept the few minutes they saved during the day by not hurrying. For emergencies, he said with a wink, or anniversaries. They passed a bakery where the baker and his daughter stood elbow deep in a bowl. When the clocks sleep, the baker called, the dough remembers itself. He wiggled his fingers in the soft mass, listening as if the flour were speaking. Liora inhaled cinnamon and patience. The compass of quiet gave a tiny hum. In the square, the grandfather clock stood, taller than any roof, all oak and memory, with its pendulum at rest and its hands comfortingly aligned at midnight. A cat was curled in the cradle of the pendulum bracket, a whisker flicking now and again like a second hand that had decided to become a breath. Liora approached and laid her palm on the clock side. She expected stillness. Instead, she felt the subtle animal warmth of a thing alive in sleep. Beneath the wood, the weight of years settled and unknotted, the way shoulders do when lips finally say, enough for today. Would you like to see the workshop? Wren asked. The clocks dreamed there. They followed him down a lane ribboned with lamplight to a long, low building with windows that glowed the color of gentle honey. Inside, dozens of clocks lay under light blankets. Carriage clocks, kitchen clocks, austere regulators, a whimsical cuckoo whose bird was tucked into its little door like a shy thought. Between the cots, people moved with practiced quiet. Instead of oil and brass polish, they held little jars labeled in tidy script. Stillness, forgiveness, second thought, Mrs. Levin's laugh. May 23rd, save from a hurry. At a bench near the far window, an older woman with a gray braid the size of a rope was rubbing a soft cloth over a clock's glass face with the attention one gives to old photographs. She looked up as they approached, her gaze clear water. "Ah, Wren," she said, "and Farron, you've brought a traveler." "Matilda," Wren said, "our clocks are dreaming well. They do better when the town does," she said, and extended a hand to Leora. The palm was warm and dry, the sort that had held tools and heads in equal measure. "Come," she said, "let me introduce you." She lifted the blanket from a square, black mantel clock whose corners had been polished by many years of moving from mantel to box to mantel again. This one belonged to a man who timed his life by the trains, Matilda said fondly. It kept pace with his breath for 40 years. After he retired, it didn't know what to do with noon. It is learning that time without whistles is still time. Leora bent close. The clock did not tick. Its spring was let down for sleep, but she sensed a slow settling, like a bird easing deeper into feathers. Matilda uncovered another, a kitchen clock painted with faded cherries. "This one," she said, "went quiet for a woman who stopped baking after she lost someone." Her voice softened without breaking. "We brushed it with saved laughter from old recipes. Now, when it wakes, it only chimes for birthdays and rainy days." "And that cuckoo?" Leora asked, drawn to the small carved door. Matilda smiled. "Ah, that one cuckoo's only on the first I'm sorry and the last I know of a day. The rest, it keeps to itself." Leora's lantern warmed against her dress, and she felt the boy from the other night in Naptide, the one who had given her the dented watch for apologies. The town's lesson unspooled gently into a wider cloth. Asterisk time isn't only counted, it's chosen. Asterisk, a soft chord rose from the far end of the room. 3 crystal glasses rubbed with wet fingers, perhaps, or bells remembering a song. Wren lifted his head. "Second quiet deepens," he said. "We're near the festival." "The festival?" Leora asked. "Of silent hours," Matilda said, her smile with a secret folded into it. "We hold it whenever the sky looks the way it looks now, and enough people have set something down." They stepped back into the street. Night had brightened in that lanternless way. Stars closer, air kinder, corners without shade. The square gathered itself without calling names. Families moved in from doorways, bakers in flower aprons, seamstresses in threads of moon, children in their day's last mischief. No one checked a clock. No clock checked them. At the square's center, a circle had been drawn in chalk. Beside it, on a little cloth, nothing grand, lay a battered tin kettle, a stack of small cups, and a loaf with a crack down its middle that looked like a smile. Wren took the kettle and poured hot water into the cups. The steam rose with a scent that Leora could not name, something between mint and July. An old man with a violin tucked himself near the western bench. He tuned not to a pitch but to the sound of the street, a baby's sigh, a cart settling its wheels, the hush of many feet agreeing with stone. When he drew the bow across the strings, the note that grew was not music yet. It was intention made audible, a line hung in the air for others to hang their quiet on. Wren stepped into the chalk circle and lifted his arms. "Friends," he said, "we mark our silent hours. Not because we must, but because it helps us notice when we have done enough." He turned to the crowd, and one by one, they stepped forward with small offerings. A seamstress laid a thread of silver on the cobbles. "For the sleeve I mended without a customer's name. Let it warm someone I do not know." A boy set down a smooth stone with a hole in the middle. "For the time I didn't run to be first, and my feet found a slower game." A woman placed a wooden spoon. "For soup served without counting bowls." Leora's hand found the dented apology watch in her pocket. She had not used it yet. It had warmed to her fingers but kept its minute unspent, patient as a promise not quite ready. She stepped into the circle and laid the watch beside the spoon. "For the words I will speak when morning comes," she said, voice steady. "To someone who waits for them and doesn't yet know they're already on the way." No one applauded. The circle did not require proof. The violin found a new note that matched the way her ribs opened. Matilda came forward last. She set on the stones a small key, not to a clock, Leora thought, but perhaps to a drawer or a box that had waited deliberately long. "For the hour I locked when the world was loud and have now unlocked," Matilda said. "Let it pass through the square so the others can breathe more easily." They stood in a ring without holding hands and were connected anyway. Ren closed his eyes, listening to the sound a town makes when it gives itself permission to go slowly. The violin sang a little, then didn't. The kettle made a soft cluck inside itself. Somewhere a dog turned twice in the grass and forgot why it had stood up. When the circle emptied, Ren tipped his head toward the tower. "We'll show you the roof," he said to Leora, his voice an invitation with a ribbon on it. The tower stairs were worn in the middle where many feet had chosen not to hurry for many years. At the top, shutters opened themselves with the courtesy of old wood. The town lay below in its shawl of lamplight. Beyond, the river went on with its steady work of connecting things. The clocks sleep because the town chooses to measure evenings with something besides numbers, Ren said, leaning his elbows on the sill. "Bread, as you heard. Letters written. Fences mended in silence. Children tucked with stories that end when a breath ends, not when a minute hand arrives. We wake them at first bird call. The clocks, I mean, not the children. They wake for pancakes." Leora laughed quietly. She let her laugh settle into the square like a dropped scarf. The compass of quiet nudged in her direction pocket, content in the way of tools that are being used for their proper work. "May I ask a thing?" she said. Ren nodded. "What do you do when a day is too full? When even 3 quiets cannot hold it? When someone arrives with their hurry still louder than any bell?" Ren took his time, which was his way of answering even before his mouth did. "We loan the minutes from the door bags," he said. "We insist on soup. We let them talk until the edge of their voice gets round. And if that fails, we put them to bed." "Put them to bed?" "In the hall of early nights," Ren grinned. "Best pillows on the island. There's an art to surrender. We keep the sheets warm." They descended and crossed to a narrow street where a lantern with a pale blue flame hung at eye level. Behind the door, a room spread itself soft. Cots with quilts, shelves of books whose spines had the confidence of being read slowly, bowls of polished stones in a dozen shapes for restless hands. A sign on the wall read, "Asterisk, leave here what tomorrow doesn't need to carry." Asterisk under it, a braid of ribbon hung, each strand knotted with someone's little burden. A boy slept with his cheek on his forearm. A woman breathed through her mouth in the particular release of one who had tried all day to be composed and had finally grown tired of being a container. Farron touched the doorframe with respect. "You've made a good harbor," he said to Ren. "We practice," Ren replied. "A harbor, like a quilt, grows better with mending." They came out into the square as the third quiet began, the hour before dawn when night loosens the last of what it held. The air cooled as if a window had opened in the sky. People drifted home, not dismissed but released. Cats stretched. Someone yawned in a way that made other mouths take sympathy yawns they did not regret. At the grandfather clock, Matilda stood with her hands on the case in a posture that was both blessing and consent. "All right, old friend," she whispered. "Back to it, but kindly." She reached inside with a key that knew its lock and wound the spring with a care that was almost conversational. The pendulum sighed, then began to move, left, right, like a conversation between equals. The hands lifted from their empty rest and took up their duties as if they had never been arduous. The square did not break in a bustle. It simply altered its attention. Roosters in unseen yards performed their ancient poem. The baker opened his door and set the first loaves, dusted with flour like frost on hilltops, on the sill. Ren walked with Leora back toward the river. "The clocks will count for us today," he said, "but they don't command. We keep that for ourselves. At the mooring carved like a pillow, Farron untied a rope whose knot knew how to release without leaving a mark. Leora turned to Wren. "Thank you," she said, "for your minutes, for your beds, for teaching me how to let the night carry the heavy part." Wren offered her the ledger he'd been writing in when they arrived. "Sign," he asked. She took the pencil. In the space beneath a neat list of names and dates, she wrote Leora, "Remember to rest while the clocks do." Then, after a breath, she added a second line. "And when they wake, do not forget what you learned while they slept." Matilda appeared with a small parcel wrapped in cloth. "For the road," she said. Inside, a pocket clock no larger than a plum lay on a nest of wool. Its hands were fixed forever at midnight. Its face read not numbers, but 4 small words, one each in the place where 12, 3, 6, and 9 would have been. "Begin, listen enough, home." "It doesn't tick," Matilda said. "On purpose. It reminds. Keep it near when you think you ought to rush." Leora fastened the ribbon to the cord with her lantern and compass. The three hung together like friends who took turns speaking. The needle aligned to the river's next curve without insisting. Farron set the pole, and the Somnia slid into the current. On the bank, Wren lifted a hand. Matilda did not wave. She closed her eyes for a moment instead, which somehow felt more like a farewell and less like a promise. The island of Naptide receded, but did not diminish. Leora could feel it still, a steady weight on the scale that kept Hurry from winning. She sat on the deck with her back against a coil of rope that smelled faintly of salt and something older than salt. Dawn unstitched the horizon with a few careful pulls, revealing a seam of color that decided to be morning. Birds practiced the names of each other. The river took what had been offered to it, size, minutes, a dented watch's intention, and carried them the way it carried leaves, gently, together, toward places where they might be useful. Leora touched each of her tools in turn. The lantern's light, warm and present, had learned her breath and now kept time with it politely. The compass, quiet and sure, pulled not toward north but toward meaning. The small midnight clock rested against her palm, its 4 words calm as stones in a stream. She thought of the question she had asked Wren, about days too full, and found a new answer inside the motion of the water. Asterisk when a day overcrowds itself, widen the shore. Asterisk she pictured the hall of early nights, the ribbon braid of uncared burdens, the boy's bouquet of sleeping watches, the cuckoo that waited to celebrate apologies and understanding. The memory laid itself over her shoulders like a shawl that remembered her shape. Farron hummed under his breath in the way he did when the river and he were thinking the same thought. "Next true thing?" he asked without looking up. Leora glanced down at the compass. The needle lay there at ease, tilted toward a faint thread of mist where the water grew thoughtful. She held Matilda's midnight clock and peered through the empty circle between begin and listen, as if it were a little window. Beyond, land gathered itself into a shape like a row of spines, trees perhaps, leaning close together as if whispering. The words rose before she named them. "The library of warm mornings," she said softly. "Books that open when you breathe right." Farron nodded, satisfied. A good place after a town that measures nights kindly. They sailed in agreeable silence. The Somnia's sail took on the first touch of daylight and wore it without bragging. Leora closed her eyes and counted, not numbers but arrivals. The smell of the river, the sound of a heron scolding the water for being too shiny, the feeling of the deck under her like the kind of wooden floor that knows all your footsteps and loves them anyway. When she opened her eyes, the world had not changed. She had. Behind them, Naptide's clocks had woken and begun their day's small duties with rested hands. Ahead, the air rippled in a way books would understand. Between, the river carried everything at the speed of a long, contented breath. Leora smoothed the cloth over Matilda's gift and tucked it nearer to her heart. If she listened carefully, she could almost hear the grandfather clock's pendulum from miles away. Not scolding, not chasing, only marking the space where a life could unspool gently. She leaned her head against the coil of rope, and the Somnia rocked as if agreeing that, for the next few minutes, Rest was still the most useful thing a person could practice. The compass hummed. The lantern sighed. The small midnight clock did what it did best, said nothing. And in the quiet it left, Leora felt herself become wonderfully, deliberately unhurried. The river and the sky matched her. Even the sun, when it finally lifted, came up at a pace that made room for birdsong and the last long dream of a town whose clocks knew how to sleep. And so the voyage continued, balanced between minutes and meanings, with a traveler who had learned that time is most faithful when you treat it like a companion, listened to, trusted, and allowed to rest.